Patricia Williams stood at the edge of the ballroom, watching her son David announce his engagement to the woman who would soon become her daughter-in-law. The charity gala was in full swing, with hundreds of guests celebrating another successful year for the Williams Foundation. David had built his technology company from nothing, and now at 32 he was worth more money than Patricia had ever dreamed possible when she was raising him as a single mother in Detroit. "Ladies and gentlemen," David said into the microphone, his voice carrying across the elegant hotel ballroom, "I want to share some wonderful news with all of you tonight. 3 months ago, I asked the most amazing woman to be my wife, and she said yes." The crowd erupted in applause as David pulled his fiancée closer to him. Victoria Sterling stepped forward with a perfect smile, her blonde hair styled in an expensive updo, wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than most people made in a month. She waved at the crowd like she was born for this kind of attention. Patricia clapped along with everyone else, but something in her chest felt tight. She had been watching Victoria carefully all evening, and what she saw bothered her more than she wanted to admit. During dinner, Victoria had barely touched her food, claiming she was on a special diet. When the young waiter accidentally spilled a few drops of water near her chair, Victoria had given him such a cold look that the poor boy stammered through his apology. "We're planning a spring wedding," Victoria announced, taking the microphone from David. "Something elegant and refined, worthy of celebrating love in the proper way." Patricia noticed how Victoria emphasized the word proper, and how her eyes seemed to scan the room when she said it, as if she was making sure everyone understood what kind of people they were. After the announcement, Patricia made her way through the crowd, accepting congratulations from friends and family. She had known most of these people for years, many of them from the old neighborhood who had supported David's dreams from the beginning. Mrs. Henderson, who used to babysit David, when Patricia worked double shifts, grabbed her hand with tears in her eyes. "Can you believe it, Patricia? Your boy made it so big, and now he's getting married to such a beautiful girl." Patricia smiled and nodded, but her attention was drawn to a conversation happening near the dessert table. Victoria was talking to her friend, a tall woman with perfectly straight hair and clothes that screamed money. "The wedding planner suggested we keep the guest list small," Victoria was saying, her voice carrying just enough for Patricia to hear. "I told her we need to be selective about who we invite. Some of David's family friends are, well, let's just say they might not fit the atmosphere we're going for." Patricia felt her blood pressure rise. She knew exactly what Victoria meant by atmosphere. She had lived through enough subtle and not-so-subtle comments about her background to recognize the coded language. Later in the evening, Patricia found herself in the hotel's ladies' room, touching up her lipstick, when Victoria and 2 of her friends walked in. They didn't notice Patricia in the corner stall as they started talking freely. "I still can't believe you're actually going through with this," one of the friends said. "I mean, David's sweet and obviously loaded, but his mother seems so intense." Victoria laughed, but it wasn't a kind sound. "Patricia thinks she can keep treating David like he's still her little boy. She doesn't understand that he needs to move in different circles now. Once we're married, I'll help him see that some relationships are just holding him back." "What about all this charity work he does?" the other friend asked. "Building computer labs in poor schools and giving scholarships to kids who probably won't even use them properly." "That's exactly what I'm talking about," Victoria replied, checking her makeup in the mirror. "David has this bleeding heart thing because of how he grew up, but he can't save everyone, and frankly, throwing money at people who haven't earned it isn't really helping them. I'm going to help him focus his generosity on causes that actually matter." Patricia gripped the stall door handle so hard her knuckles turned white. She wanted to march out there and tell Victoria exactly what she thought about her attitude, but something stopped her. If she confronted Victoria now, the girl would just be more careful about hiding her true feelings. David would never believe it, especially not on the night of their engagement announcement. When the coast was clear, Patricia emerged from the stall and looked at herself in the mirror. At 58, she had worked hard to build a good life for herself and her son. She had gone back to school while working full-time, earned her business degree, and eventually started her own successful consulting firm. She wasn't some naive woman who didn't understand the world, and she certainly wasn't going to let anyone dismiss her or her son's values without a fight. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and small talk. Patricia watched Victoria work the room like a professional, charming the wealthy donors and avoiding the longtime family friends. When David introduced Victoria to his mentor, Mr. Jackson, an older black man who had given David his first business loan, Victoria's smile seemed strained. She shook his hand briefly and then immediately turned to greet a younger white couple who owned several restaurants in the city. "Mom, isn't this incredible?" David found Patricia near the end of the evening, his face glowing with happiness. "Victoria is everything I could have asked for. She's beautiful, intelligent, and she really understands the kind of life we can build together." Patricia looked at her son, seeing the same excited expression he'd had as a little boy when he showed her his first computer program. David was brilliant with technology and business, but he had always been trusting when it came to people. He looked for the best in everyone, which had served him well in most areas of his life. "She seems lovely, sweetheart," Patricia said carefully. "Have you two talked about the important things? Your values, your goals, how you want to spend your money and time?" "Of course," David said. "Victoria totally supports my work with the foundation. She has great ideas about expanding our reach and making our events more sophisticated." The word sophisticated hung in the air between them. Patricia wondered if David understood what Victoria meant by that, or if he was hearing what he wanted to hear. As the evening wound down, Patricia helped organize the cleanup, something she had done at every foundation event for years. She noticed that Victoria had disappeared early, claiming she had a spa appointment in the morning and needed her beauty sleep. David had offered to leave with her, but Victoria insisted he stay to thank their guests properly, while stacking chairs. With some of the volunteers, Patricia overheard two of Victoria's friends talking near the exit. "I give it 5 years," one of them said. "Victoria will play the perfect wife until she gets tired of the whole thing. Did you see how much money his company is worth in Forbes? She'll be set for life." Patricia's hands stilled on the chair she was holding. She looked around to see if anyone else had heard, but the other volunteers were busy with their own tasks. That night, Patricia sat in her living room with a cup of tea, staring at the framed photos on her mantel. Pictures of David at every stage of his life, from his high school graduation to the day his company went public. In every photo, his smile was genuine and full of hope. She thought about the conversation she had overheard in the bathroom, the way Victoria had dismissed David's charitable work, and the casual way her friends talked about the marriage like it was a business transaction. Patricia had raised David to be generous and kind, to remember where he came from and help others climb the same ladder he had climbed. The idea that someone might try to change those fundamental parts of who he was made her feel sick. Patricia knew she had to do something, but she also knew that David wouldn't listen to vague concerns or motherly intuition. He was in love, and love had a way of making people deaf to warnings about the object of their affection. If she was going to protect her son, she would need proof of who Victoria really was when she thought no one was watching. The next morning, Patricia sat at her kitchen table with her laptop, researching everything she could find about Victoria Startling and her family. What she discovered was a world of wealth and privilege that seemed to exist without any real purpose beyond maintaining itself. Victoria had never held a real job, had never volunteered for anything that didn't come with social recognition, and had never shown any interest in causes that didn't directly benefit her social circle. As Patricia closed her laptop, she made a decision that would change everything. She was going to find out who Victoria really was, and she was going to do whatever it took to protect her son from making the biggest mistake of his life. Patricia spent the next 2 weeks planning something she never thought she would do in her life. She was going to spy on her future daughter-in-law, and she needed to be smart about it. Victoria came from old money, the kind of family that had been wealthy for generations. They lived in a mansion in the most expensive part of town, and Patricia knew that getting close to Victoria would require more than just showing up at their front door. The idea came to her during lunch with her friend Carmen, who owned a cleaning service that worked for wealthy families across the city. Carmen had been complaining about how hard it was to find reliable workers who could pass the background checks that rich families required. "You know what's crazy?" Carmen said, stabbing her salad with her fork. These people treat housekeepers like we're invisible. They say things in front of us that they would never say to their friends. It's like they think we don't have ears or brains. Patricia nearly choked on her sandwich. Carmen, do you still need workers for your company? Always. Why? You know someone looking for work? Patricia looked at her friend carefully. Carmen had known her for 15 years, ever since they met at a business networking event. She was trustworthy and discreet, but what Patricia was about to ask was unusual. What if I told you I needed to work undercover as a housekeeper for a specific family, just for a few weeks? Carmen put down her fork and stared at Patricia. Girl, what are you talking about? You run your own consulting business. Why would you want to clean houses? Patricia explained everything. The engagement, the overheard conversations, her growing concerns about Victoria's character. Carmen listened without interrupting, occasionally shaking her head or making small sounds of disapproval. So you want to go undercover in your son's fiancé's house to spy on her? Carmen summarized when Patricia finished. I know it sounds crazy, but Carmen, you should have heard the way she talked about David's charity work. She thinks helping poor kids is a waste of money. What kind of person thinks that? Carmen was quiet for a long moment. The Startling family has been one of my clients for 3 years, she finally said. They go through housekeepers like tissues. Very demanding, very particular about everything. The current girl is quitting next week because Mrs. Startling criticized everything she did. Patricia's heart started beating faster. Would you be able to get me in there? Patricia, this is risky. If they find out who you really are, it won't just be embarrassing. Rich people like that can make life very difficult for anyone who crosses them. I know the risks, but I have to do this. David is my only child, Carmen. I can't let him marry someone who's going to destroy everything he's worked for. 2 days later, Patricia found herself sitting in her car outside a beauty supply store, holding a box of hair dye and some clothes she had bought from a thrift shop. She had told David she was going out of town for a business conference, which wasn't entirely a lie since she was treating this like the most important business of her life. At home, Patricia transformed herself in front of her bathroom mirror. She dyed her hair gray and styled it differently than she normally wore it. She put on reading glasses and practiced speaking with a slight accent, something she remembered from visiting her grandmother in South Carolina years ago. She chose clothes that were neat and clean but clearly not expensive, the kind of outfit someone might wear to a housekeeping job. Looking at herself in the mirror, Patricia barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Gone was Patricia Williams, successful business consultant. In her place stood Mary Johnson, middle-aged housekeeper looking for steady work. Carmen had arranged for Mary to interview with Mrs. Startling on a Thursday morning. Patricia's stomach was in knots as she drove through the gates of the Startling estate. The house was enormous, with perfectly maintained gardens and a circular driveway that could fit 20 cars. A woman in her 50s answered the door, wearing clothes that probably cost more than most people's rent. This had to be Victoria's mother, though Patricia could see where Victoria got her looks and her attitude. You must be Mary Johnson, the woman said, looking Patricia up and down like she was inspecting a piece of furniture. Carmen spoke very highly of your work. I'm Mrs. Startling. Patricia nodded and followed Mrs. Startling through rooms that looked like they belonged in a museum. Everything was perfectly arranged, from the fresh flowers on every table to the books that looked like they had never been opened. We have very high standards in this house, Mrs. Startling explained as they walked. Our previous girl simply couldn't meet our expectations. She was careless with our belongings and didn't understand the importance of discretion. Yes, ma'am, Patricia said in her practiced accent. I understand completely. I take pride in my work, and I know how to mind my own business. They ended up in a sitting room where Victoria was having tea with a friend. Patricia's heart pounded as she got her first close look at her son's fiancée since the engagement party. Victoria looked up from her conversation just long enough to give Patricia the same dismissive glance her mother had used. This is Mary, the new housekeeper candidate, Mrs. Startling announced. Victoria nodded without really looking at Patricia. Just make sure she understands about the wedding preparations. We can't have anyone disturbing the vendors or getting in the way of the planning. Of course, dear, Mrs. Startling said. Mary, my daughter is getting married in 2 months to a very successful businessman. This is an extremely important time for our family, and we need someone who can handle the extra responsibilities without causing any disruptions. Patricia managed to keep her expression neutral, but inside she was burning. Victoria was talking about her son like he was just some business deal, and neither woman had bothered to introduce themselves properly or treat Patricia like a human being. The interview continued with Mrs. Startling explaining the duties, the schedule, and the rules. Patricia would work 3 days a week, arriving early in the morning and leaving by late afternoon. She would be responsible for cleaning the main living areas, helping with party preparations, and staying out of the way when the family had guests. One more thing, Mrs. Startling said as they finished the tour. We value loyalty and discretion above everything else. What happens in this house stays in this house. We've had problems in the past with help who thought they could gossip about our family's private business. You don't have to worry about that with me, ma'am, Patricia said. I'm just here to do my job. As Patricia left the Startling house, she felt like she was leaving a different world. Everything about the place felt cold and unwelcoming, despite all the expensive decorations and fancy furniture. She thought about her own home, which was comfortable and filled with warmth, and wondered how David would fit into this environment. Her first day of work was Monday morning. Patricia arrived at 7 o'clock sharp, wearing her uniform and carrying a small bag with cleaning supplies. Mrs. Startling met her at the back door and handed her a list of tasks that would have taken 2 people all day to complete. Victoria has a brunch with her wedding planner at 10, Mrs. Startling explained. Make sure the dining room and front parlor are perfect before then. And remember, if you see or hear anything during your work, you didn't see or hear it. Patricia nodded and got to work. She started in the dining room, polishing the enormous wooden table and arranging the chairs just so. As she worked, she could hear Victoria on the phone in the next room, talking loudly enough for her voice to carry. I don't care what David thinks about the menu, Victoria was saying. This is my wedding, and I'm not serving soul food just because it's what his family expects. We're having a sophisticated event, not some backyard barbecue. Patricia's hands stilled on the table she was polishing. Soul food? David had never mentioned wanting any particular type of food for the wedding. In fact, he had always been flexible about things like that. Victoria was making up problems that didn't exist. The phone conversation continued, and Patricia found herself moving closer to the doorway to hear better. Trust me, once we're married, I'll help David understand that. He needs to be more selective about his associations, Victoria said. Some of his childhood friends are sweet, but they don't really fit with the image we need to project. And don't get me started on his mother. She means well, but she has no idea how to behave in proper society. Patricia felt like she had been punched in the stomach. She gripped her cleaning cloth so tightly her knuckles turned white. Victoria was planning to isolate David from everyone who had supported him and loved him before she came along. The key is to do it gradually, Victoria continued. If I try to change everything at once, David will resist. But if I make small suggestions here and there, help him see that certain people are holding him back, he'll start to distance himself naturally. Patricia forced herself to keep working, but her mind was racing. This was worse than she had imagined. Victoria wasn't just a spoiled rich girl who looked down on poor people. She was planning to systematically remove everyone important from David's life and rebuild it according to her own standards. As the morning went on, Patricia observed everything. She watched how Victoria treated the wedding vendors who came to the house, speaking to them like they were servants rather than professionals she was paying for services. She listened to Victoria complain about the costs of the wedding, not because the money was a problem, but because she felt like some vendors were charging too much for work that anyone could do. By the time Patricia left the Startling house that first day, she knew she had made the right decision. Victoria was exactly the kind of person she had feared, and possibly worse. But now Patricia had to figure out how to prove it to David in a way that would make him listen. The hardest part was going home and acting normal when David called to check on her. Business trip. His voice was so happy and excited when he talked about the wedding plans that Patricia's heart broke a little more with every word. She was going to save her son from making the biggest mistake of his life, even if it meant risking everything. Patricia's second week working at the Startling house brought discoveries that made her stomach turn. She had thought Victoria was just a spoiled rich girl, but what she was uncovering was much worse. Victoria wasn't just planning to change David's social circle, she was planning to change everything about who he was. It started on a Wednesday morning when Patricia arrived to find Victoria in the kitchen, talking on her phone while drinking coffee from a cup that probably cost more than Patricia made in a day of housekeeping. "I've already started working on him," Victoria was saying to whoever was on the other end. "Last week I suggested that maybe he didn't need to personally visit every scholarship kid his foundation helps. I told him it was inefficient and that he should focus on the big picture instead of getting emotionally involved with individual cases." Patricia pretended to be busy organizing the cleaning supplies under the sink, but every word hit her like a physical blow. David had always made it a point to meet the students his foundation supported. He said it reminded him why the work mattered and kept him connected to his roots. "You should have seen his face," Victoria continued with a laugh. "He actually looked hurt, like I was asking him to abandon puppies or something. But I explained that successful people delegate these things to their staff. They don't get their hands dirty with the details." Patricia's hands were shaking as she arranged bottles of cleaning solution. Victoria was describing David's compassion like it was a weakness that needed to be fixed. The conversation got worse. "The mother is going to be the biggest problem," Victoria said, walking to the window and looking out at the garden. "She still treats him like he's 12 years old, calling him every day and expecting him to show up for every little family dinner. Once we're married, I'm going to have to set some boundaries there." Patricia forced herself to keep working, even though she wanted to march into that kitchen and tell Victoria exactly what she thought about boundaries. "I'm thinking we should move to the house in California after the wedding," Victoria continued. "Distance will make it easier to limit contact with his old life. I can convince him it's better for business expanding to the West Coast market. By the time we come back for visits, he'll be used to a different lifestyle." California. Patricia felt like the room was spinning. David had never mentioned anything about moving to California. His whole life was here, his business, his foundation, his friends, his family. Later that morning, Mrs. Startling came home from shopping with several bags from expensive stores. Patricia was dusting the living room when she overheard Mrs. Startling talking to Victoria about wedding plans. "I spoke to the caterer about the menu," Mrs. Startling said. "I made sure they understand we want elegant options, nothing too ethnic. We don't want guests to feel uncomfortable." Victoria laughed. "Good thinking, Mom. David mentioned something about wanting to include some of his family's traditional foods, but I told him we need to think about our guests' expectations. Most of them have never experienced that kind of cuisine." Patricia's jaw clenched. That kind of cuisine. They were talking about food that represented David's heritage like it was something embarrassing. She remembered the Sunday dinners David used to love when he was growing up, how excited he would get about his grandmother's recipes. "What about the guest list?" Mrs. Startling asked. "Have you made any progress there?" "I'm working on it," Victoria replied. "I suggested we limit +1s for people from his side. You know how those types of events can get when people bring their whole extended families. We want to maintain a certain atmosphere." Patricia had to bite her tongue to keep from responding. Those types of events. Victoria was talking about David's family and friends like they were going to ruin the wedding just by being themselves. The worst discovery came on Friday afternoon. Patricia was cleaning the upstairs hallway when she heard Victoria's voice coming from her bedroom. The door was slightly open and Patricia could see Victoria sitting at her computer, talking to someone on video chat. "The prenup negotiations are going exactly as planned," Victoria was saying to a woman who looked like her sister. "Daddy's lawyer is brilliant. We structured it so that if the marriage lasts less than 5 years, I get a settlement. But if it lasts longer than that, I'm entitled to half of everything he builds during the marriage." Patricia felt sick. Victoria was talking about her marriage to David like it was a business investment with guaranteed returns. "What if he actually wants to stay married?" the sister asked through the computer screen. Victoria shrugged. Then I'll have a rich husband who funds my lifestyle while I do whatever I want. If he becomes boring, or if someone better comes along, I'll have plenty of money to start over. Either way, I win. And you're sure he doesn't suspect anything? Please, Victoria said with a dismissive wave. David is so trusting it's almost pathetic. He thinks everyone is as honest and good-hearted as he is. He has no idea how the real world works. Patricia had heard enough. She quietly moved away from the door and finished her work in a daze. David wasn't just marrying someone who looked down on his background. He was marrying someone who saw him as a target, someone who was planning to either control him or take his money and run. That evening, Patricia sat in her car outside the Startling house for a long time before driving home. She needed to process what she had learned and figure out what to do with the information. David would never believe her if she just told him what she had overheard. He would think she was being an overprotective mother who didn't want him to get married. The next Monday brought even more disturbing revelations. Patricia arrived at work to find Victoria entertaining a friend, a woman named Chelsea, who seemed to share Victoria's views about everything. I still can't believe you're going through with this wedding, Chelsea said as Patricia cleaned around them. I mean, David is nice enough, but he's so earnest about everything. Doesn't that get exhausting? It's actually useful, Victoria replied. His sincerity makes people trust him, which is good for business, and his guilt about his success makes him easy to manipulate. When I want something, I just frame it as being good for other people, and he goes along with it. Patricia was arranging flowers in a vase nearby, trying to look invisible while listening to every word. Like what? Chelsea asked. Well, he was resistant to the idea of a destination honeymoon because he said it was too expensive when there were people who needed help. So I told him that taking a proper honeymoon would show other successful couples that it's okay to enjoy their wealth, which would encourage more donations to charity. He booked us 2 weeks in Europe the next day. The women laughed like this was the funniest thing they had ever heard. Patricia wanted to throw the vase across the room. What about after you're married? Chelsea continued. Are you really going to pretend to care about all his charity work forever? For a while, Victoria said, but gradually I'll help him see that there are more effective ways to make a difference. Instead of giving scholarships to individual kids, he could fund research at prestigious universities. Instead of building computer labs in poor schools, he could support technology programs at private institutions that actually produce results. Patricia realized what Victoria was really saying. She wanted David to redirect his charitable giving away from helping poor children and toward causes that would benefit people like herself. The key is to make him think these changes are his idea, Victoria explained. I'll introduce him to the right people, take him to the right events, and slowly show him that his current approach is small thinking. He'll want to upgrade to more sophisticated philanthropy. As the conversation continued, Patricia learned that Victoria had already been working on David's social circle. She had been suggesting that some of his old friends were holding him back and introducing him to new people who shared her values. She had convinced him to skip several family gatherings by scheduling conflicts with business events. The most heartbreaking part was hearing Victoria describe David's love for his family as a weakness that needed to be managed. He's way too attached to his mother, Victoria complained. She calls him all the time and he actually answers. He asks her opinion about business decisions and takes her advice seriously. It's sweet, I guess, but it's not appropriate for a man in his position. Patricia's eyes filled with tears as she continued her work. David had always valued her opinion because she had sacrificed everything to help him succeed. She had worked multiple jobs to pay for his education, stayed up late helping him with homework, and celebrated every achievement along the way. The idea that Victoria saw their close relationship as something problematic made Patricia feel like her heart was breaking. By the time Patricia left work that day, she knew she couldn't wait much longer to act. Victoria wasn't just planning to marry David and change him gradually. She was already working on him, already isolating him from the people who loved him most. Every day that passed meant Victoria had more time to manipulate David and more influence over his decisions. Patricia drove home with a heavy heart, knowing that she had uncovered the truth but still not sure how to save her son from making the biggest mistake of his life. Victoria was smart, calculating, and patient. She had been planning this for months, maybe even years. But Patricia had something Victoria didn't expect. She had a mother's love and determination, and she was going to find a way to protect David no matter what it cost her. Patricia knew she needed proof. Everything she had overheard sounded unbelievable, even to her own ears. If she told David that his loving fiancée was planning to isolate him from his family and change everything about who he was, he would think she had lost her mind. She needed evidence that would make Victoria's true character impossible to deny. The opportunity came during her third week of working at the Startling house. Victoria was hosting a bridal shower, and Patricia was assigned to help serve the guests and clean up afterward. Mrs. Startling had made it clear that Patricia should be invisible during the event, which turned out to be exactly what Patricia needed. Before the party started, Patricia made a decision that scared her. She was going to record some of Victoria's conversations. She had bought a small recording device that looked like a pen, something she could keep in her uniform pocket, without anyone noticing. Her hands were shaking as she tested it that morning, but she knew this might be her only chance to get the evidence she needed. The bridal shower was everything Patricia expected from Victoria's crowd. 20 women dressed in clothes that cost more than most people's cars, drinking champagne that probably cost more than Patricia's monthly rent, and talking about things that showed how completely out of touch they were with real life. Patricia moved around the room, refilling glasses and clearing plates while the women talked as if she wasn't there. It was just like Carmen had said. Wealthy people often treated service workers like they were invisible. "Victoria, tell us about the honeymoon," one of the guests said. "I heard you're going somewhere absolutely divine." 2 weeks in Europe, Victoria replied, holding up her champagne glass. David wanted to do something simple, maybe a long weekend somewhere nearby. Can you imagine? I had to explain to him that our honeymoon would set the tone for our entire marriage. We can't start off by being cheap about important things. The women laughed and Patricia felt her stomach tighten. David had probably suggested something simple because he was always thinking about how money could be better spent helping other people. "What about after the honeymoon?" another guest asked. "Are you going to keep living in the same house?" "God, no," Victoria said with a dramatic shudder. "David's current house is nice enough, but it's in the wrong neighborhood. Too many of his old friends live nearby, and they're always dropping by unannounced. I've already started looking at properties in Westfield Hills, much more appropriate for people in our position." Patricia knew Westfield Hills. It was an exclusive community about an hour away from where David currently lived. Moving there would mean David would be far from his office, his favorite community center where he volunteered, and the neighborhood where Patricia lived. "Speaking of friends," said a woman with perfectly styled blonde hair, "what are you going to do about his social circle? Some of them seem so different from our usual crowd." Victoria lowered her voice, but not enough to keep Patricia from hearing every word. "It's going to take some work, but I'm confident I can help David see that he needs to expand his horizons. Right now, he's stuck in relationships that made sense when he was growing up poor, but don't really fit his current status." Patricia's hand tightened on the champagne bottle she was holding. "Growing up poor?" Victoria said it like it was something shameful that David needed to hide. "The key is to make new introductions while gradually creating distance from the old connections," Victoria continued. "I've already gotten him to skip a few family gatherings by scheduling other events. His mother used to have Sunday dinner with him every week, but now it's down to maybe once a month." Patricia felt like she had been punched. She had noticed that David seemed busier lately, but she hadn't realized Victoria was deliberately scheduling things to keep him away from family time. "What about his charity work?" asked another guest. "I heard he gives away millions every year to help poor children." "That's exactly what I'm talking about," Victoria said, her voice getting more animated. "David has this idea that he needs to personally save every underprivileged kid in the city. It's sweet, but it's not sustainable for someone in his position. I'm helping him see that there are more strategic ways to make a difference." "Like what?" "Well, instead of giving scholarships to random kids from bad neighborhoods, he could endow a program at an elite private school. Instead of building computer labs in public schools that will probably be destroyed in a few years, he could fund research at a prestigious university. Same amount of money, but much better long-term impact. Patricia realized that Victoria's version of better impact meant helping people who were already privileged, instead of the kids who actually needed help. The conversation was interrupted when Mrs. Startling called everyone to the dining room for lunch. As the women moved to the other room, Patricia stayed behind to clear the coffee table. That's when she overheard the most damaging conversation yet. Two of Victoria's friends had lingered in the living room, and they were talking quietly near the window. "I have to ask," one of them said. "Are you really planning to go through with this marriage, or is this just about the money?" Victoria looked around to make sure no one else was listening, then moved closer to her friends. Patricia crouched, down behind the couch, pretending to clean something she had dropped. "Honestly," Victoria said, "David is fine as husbands go. He's successful, he's not ugly, and he worships the ground I walk on. But let's be real, I'm not exactly in love with him." Patricia's heart nearly stopped beating. "Then why are you marrying him?" the second friend asked. "Because he's useful," Victoria replied matter-of-factly. "His company is worth hundreds of millions, and it's still growing. He's well-connected in business circles, and marrying him gives me instant credibility in society. Plus, he's so grateful to have someone like me that he'll probably give me whatever I want." "But what if you meet someone you actually want to be with?" Victoria shrugged. "Then I'll deal with that when it happens. The prenup is structured so that if we divorce after 5 years, I get a very comfortable settlement. If we stay married longer, I get half of everything he earns during the marriage. Either way, I'm set for life." Patricia felt sick. Victoria was talking about David like he was a business investment, not the man she claimed to love. "Don't you feel bad about deceiving him?" one of the friends asked. "Deceiving him about what?" Victoria said. "I never told him I was madly in love with him. I said he was amazing and that I wanted to build a life together. That's all true, from a certain point of view. It's not my fault if he read more into it than I meant." The women laughed, and Patricia had to cover her mouth to keep from making a sound. David thought he was marrying someone who loved him as much as he loved her. He had no idea that Victoria saw their relationship as a calculated business arrangement. Later that afternoon, after the guests had gone home, Patricia was cleaning up the kitchen when she heard Victoria on the phone with someone. The conversation was brief, but it confirmed Patricia's worst fears. "The wedding is in 3 weeks, Victoria was saying. "After that, phase 2 begins. I'll need about 6 months to establish myself as the primary influence in his life. Once I've done that, we can start making the bigger changes." "What kind of bigger changes?" the person on the other end asked. "Moving his business headquarters to California, for starters. That will put physical distance between him and his old life. Then we can work on redirecting his charitable giving toward causes that actually matter to people like us." Patricia realized that Victoria had been planning this takeover of David's life down to the smallest detail. This wasn't just about changing his social circle or his spending habits. Victoria wanted to completely remake David into the kind of man she thought he should be. The final piece of evidence came that evening when Patricia was finishing her work and preparing to leave. Victoria was in her room, video chatting with someone who looked like her sister. "I can't believe you're really going to go through with this charade," the sister said. "It's not a charade," Victoria replied. "It's a business plan. David has everything I need to live the life I want: money, status, connections, and most importantly, he's malleable. He actually listens to what I say and values my opinion." "But don't you think he deserves someone who actually loves him?" Victoria was quiet for a moment. "David will be fine. I'll take good care of him as long as he gives me what I need. He'll probably be happier with me than he would be with someone who actually loved him, because I won't make emotional demands on him. I'll just help him become the best version of himself." "You mean the version that's most useful to you?" "Same thing," Victoria said with a laugh. Patricia left the Startling house that day with a heavy heart and a recording device full of evidence. She had everything she needed to prove to David that Victoria was not the woman he thought she was. But she also knew that showing him this evidence would break his heart. As she drove home, Patricia thought about her son's face when he talked about Victoria, how happy and hopeful he looked when he discussed their future together. She was about to destroy that happiness, but she knew it was better for him to be hurt now than to spend years being manipulated and controlled by someone who saw him as nothing more than a meal ticket. The wedding was in 3 weeks. Patricia had to figure out how to save her son without destroying him in the process. The morning of the wedding arrived with perfect spring weather. Patricia sat in her car outside the beautiful church, watching guests arrive in expensive cars and designer clothes. Her heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. Today was the day she would either save her son's life or lose him forever. She had spent the past week planning exactly what she was going to do. The recordings were ready, saved on her phone, and backed up in 3 different places. She had even made copies for David's lawyer, just in case Victoria's family tried to silence her with threats or lawsuits. Patricia looked at herself in the car mirror one more time. She was still wearing her Mary Johnson disguise, the gray hair, the reading glasses, the simple clothes. In a few minutes, she would walk into that church as the housekeeper, but she would leave as David's mother, no matter what the consequences. Inside the church, Patricia could see David standing at the altar with his best friend Tony, who was serving as his best man. David looked nervous but happy, adjusting his tie and smiling at guests as they took their seats. Patricia's heart broke a little seeing how excited he was about marrying someone who saw him as nothing more than a business opportunity. The church was decorated with flowers that probably cost more than most people's yearly salary. Victoria's family had spared no expense making sure this wedding looked perfect for their wealthy friends. Patricia noticed that David's side of the church was much smaller than Victoria's, and she realized this was probably intentional. Victoria had been working for months to minimize David's connections to his old life. Patricia slipped into the church through a side door, just like she had planned. She had told the wedding coordinator that she was part of the cleaning crew, there to make sure everything stayed perfect during the ceremony. The coordinator barely looked at her, just pointed toward the back of the church and told her to stay out of sight. From her position near the back wall, Patricia could see everything. Victoria's bridesmaids were lined up at the front of the church, all looking like they had stepped out of a fashion magazine. David's groomsmen looked uncomfortable in their expensive rented tuxedos, and Patricia could tell they felt out of place in this fancy setting. Mrs. Startling was sitting in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief and looking like the mother of the bride in a movie. Next to her sat Victoria's father, a stern-looking man who kept checking his expensive watch like he had somewhere more important to be. The music started, and everyone stood as Victoria appeared at the back of the church. She looked absolutely stunning in a dress that probably cost more than most people's cars. The veil was made of antique lace, and her jewelry sparkled in the light from the stained glass windows. Patricia had to admit that Victoria looked exactly like what most people would picture as the perfect bride. As Victoria walked down the aisle, Patricia saw David's face light up with joy. He looked at his bride like she was the most wonderful thing he had ever seen, and Patricia felt tears starting in her eyes. Her son really believed he was marrying the love of his life. The minister began the ceremony, talking about love and commitment and the sacred bond of marriage. Patricia listened to every word, knowing that everything the minister was saying was based on a lie. Victoria wasn't committing to love and honor David. She was committing to use him for as long as it benefited her. If anyone knows of any reason why these two should not be wed, speak now or forever hold your peace, the minister said. This was it, Patricia's moment. Her hands were shaking as she stepped forward from the back of the church. I do, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent church. Every head turned to look at her. Patricia heard gasps and murmurs as people tried to figure out who this woman was and why she was interrupting the wedding. David's face showed complete confusion as he stared at the gray-haired woman in simple clothes. Excuse me, the minister said, looking flustered. Ma'am, this is a private ceremony. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Patricia walked slowly down the aisle, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. My name is Patricia Williams, she announced to the shocked crowd. "And that man at the altar is my son." David's jaw dropped. Victoria went pale under her makeup. Mrs. Startling looked like she was about to faint. "Mom?" David whispered, staring at Patricia like he was seeing a ghost. "What are you doing? Why do you look like that?" Patricia reached the front of the church and looked directly at David. "Son, I need to tell you something about the woman you're about to marry. Something you need to hear before you make a mistake that will ruin your life." "This is ridiculous," Victoria said, finding her voice. "Security, get this woman out of here." But David held up his hand. "Wait," he said, his voice shaky. "Mom, what's going on? Why are you dressed like that? Where have you been for the past month?" Patricia took a deep breath. "I've been working undercover as a housekeeper in Victoria's family home. I've been listening to her conversations and learning about who she really is when she thinks no one is watching." The church erupted in shocked whispers. Victoria's face went from pale to bright red. "This is insane," she said. "David, your mother has clearly lost her mind. She's been spying on me like some kind of stalker." "I had to," Patricia said, looking at David with tears in her eyes. "I knew something was wrong, but I also knew you wouldn't believe me without proof. So I got proof." She pulled out her phone and held it up. "I have recordings of Victoria talking about your marriage like it's a business deal. I have her admitting that she doesn't love you, that she's only marrying you for your money and status. I have her planning to isolate you from your family and friends, to move you away from everything you care about, and to change your charity work so it helps rich people instead of poor children." "That's not true," Victoria said, but her voice sounded panicked now instead of confident. David looked back and forth between his mother and his bride, his face showing a mixture of confusion, hurt, and growing anger. "Mom, this is my wedding day. Even if you have concerns about Victoria, couldn't this wait?" "No, son, it couldn't," Patricia said firmly, "because once you marry her, she's going to start destroying everything that makes you who you are. She's already started. When was the last time you had Sunday dinner with me? When was the last time you visited the community center where you used to volunteer? When was the last time you personally met with one of the scholarship kids your foundation helps?" David's face changed as he realized what Patricia was saying. "Those were just scheduling conflicts." "No, they weren't," Patricia said. "They were deliberate attempts to separate you from your roots. Victoria has been planning this for months. She wants to move you to California, change your charitable giving, and turn you into someone completely different." "These are lies," Victoria said, but her voice was getting weaker. Patricia held up her phone again. "Would you like me to play the recordings? I have Victoria talking to her friends about how she's going to manipulate you. I have her admitting that she doesn't love you and that she sees this marriage as a business investment. I have her laughing about how trusting and naive you are." The church was completely silent now except for the sound of people breathing. David stared at Victoria with a look Patricia had never seen on his face before. "Victoria," he said quietly, "tell me my mother is lying." Victoria looked around the church like she was trapped. Her parents were staring at her with horror. Her bridesmaids were backing away from her. The guests were all watching like they were witnessing a car accident. "David, I can explain," Victoria started to say. "Explain what?" David asked, his voice getting louder. "Explain why my mother has recordings of you talking about our marriage like it's a business deal. Explain why you've been lying to me about your feelings. Explain why you've been trying to change everything about who I am." Victoria's composure finally cracked completely. "You don't understand," she said desperately. "I was trying to help. You become better than you are. You have so much potential, but you're wasting it on people who don't matter. I could have made you into someone truly important." The words hung in the air like a bomb had gone off. David stepped back from Victoria, like she had slapped him. "People who don't matter," he repeated slowly. "You mean my family? My friends? The kids I helped through my foundation?" "I mean people who are holding you back from achieving your full potential," Victoria said. And Patricia could see that she still didn't understand how badly she had just damaged herself. David looked at Victoria for a long moment, then slowly reached up and removed his boutonniere. "This wedding is over," he said clearly. "Victoria, I can't marry someone who thinks the people I love don't matter. I can't marry someone who sees me as a project to be improved instead of a person to be loved." He turned to face He shocked crowd. "I'm sorry everyone came all this way, but there's not going to be a wedding today. Thank you for your understanding." Victoria stood frozen in her wedding dress as David walked past her toward Patricia. He stopped in front of his mother and looked at her for a moment. "I'm sorry I didn't listen to your concerns earlier," he said quietly. "And thank you for caring enough about me to do something this difficult." Patricia hugged her son tightly, feeling like a huge weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "I love you, David. I just wanted to protect you." As they walked out of the church together, Patricia could hear Victoria finally breaking down completely behind them. Mrs. Startling was trying to calm her daughter, while the guests sat in stunned silence. 6 months later, David was back to having Sunday dinner with Patricia every week. He had also started volunteering at the community center again, and personally meeting with scholarship recipients. He was happier than Patricia had seen him in years, even though he was single. "You know," he said to Patricia over dinner one Sunday, "I think I forgot who I was for a while there. Victoria was so confident about what I should become that I started believing maybe she was right." "You are perfect exactly as you are," Patricia told him. "Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise." David smiled and reached across the table to squeeze his mother's hand. "I promise I won't. And Mom, next time I'm thinking about getting married, I'm bringing her to Sunday dinner first. If she doesn't appreciate your cooking and your company, she's not the woman for me." Patricia laughed and squeezed his hand back. "That sounds like a perfect plan to me."